All right, I'll go ahead and start to kick things off. And Bobby, I'm going to ask a couple questions. So if you have access to the chat here in a few minutes, please feel free to type something in there. So we're going to talk about SDI today. We're going to talk about what, where, when, and how, and hope to answer those questions. Oh, Mike isn't working very well. No problem at all. All right, Matt, you want to go?
Yep.
So through our training today, kind of some goals that we have for you is that we will define specially designed instruction. We're going to look and identify considerations for planning and implementing SDI. And then our in-person training, we really try to do some collaboration for planning for SDI. So we'll see, this is our first go round with a virtual training on SDI. So we'll see how this goes. I guess I can go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Katie Mosley. I do work for the IEP Technical Assistance Center, and I'm a technical assistance specialist. Matt, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Matt Johnson, and I am also a technical assistance specialist for our center and background in special education, and been working with the Resource Center for the last better part of 17 years.
Hi, I'm Alana Harvith. I'm also with Katie and Matt. We're kind of all tag teaming this, triple teaming this. I am from the northern part of the state, Northwest Indiana. My background is special education and like a coordinator, so IEP compliance. And we want to hear from you, Bobby, even if it's in the chat. Where are you from and what is your role? So we can get to know you too. So we're going to make sure, if you don't mind sharing, you can emoji it. You can just put a description of who you are, maybe something that you like. So just so we can get to know you and what your objective is for today too. Anything.
And we also have Sean Pennington from Department of Education, and we're happy to have him. I know he's eating some lunch right now. Yep. So you can stay hidden if you want, or if you want to take a second and just introduce yourself, you can.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Bobby. My name's Sean Pennington. I'm assistant director for call it the OSA team. It's an incredibly long name, so I'll spare you that, but work alongside these fine folks at the TA Center. So nice to meet you. And I'm gonna go try to eat.
Okay, Bobby, and really, you're kind of lucky, I think, because we can really tailor this to anything that you need us. So I noticed you said you were new to this role. So in terms of education, is education like is this your first year, or were you a gen ed teacher and transitioning to special education? I think that might just help us be able to guide a little better. And since we can really kind of tailor this to you, we just want to help the best way that we possibly can. Oh, wow. Okay. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Okay, adult training. Even if it's unrelated, to SDI, if you just have a general question about education or the special education process, I will tell you Matt and Alana are the folks with our special education background, and they are so knowledgeable. My background is general education. I was a middle school English teacher for 19 years before I joined the center. All right, so let's move on. So Bobby, this is a great resource. You're going to want to be sure to either copy this Padlet code, or you can scan the QR code with your phone, and it'll take you to a Padlet that our Resource Center puts together. You'll always have access to this Padlet, but we have some great information in there about specially designed instruction. It will have some of the resources that we will talk about today. And you will always have access to that. So anytime we come across new research or new information that benefits Indiana educators, we update that, and you will get the update live in real time. You won't get a notification or anything, so we just really encourage you to go and check it out. We have some articles, some videos, some links to books, resources our center really finds useful when we talk about SDI. All right, so let's look at what is specially designed instruction. And we're just going to jump into some definitions. So really, SDI is defined very loosely in IDEA definition. So it's just adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child that results from a child's disability and to ensure access of the child to the general curriculum. So this definition leaves it open to the states to interpret it how they want. And so really it relies on good educators to make some decisions that are best for students. So we'll take a look at another definition. This one is from Anne Benninghoff, and she has a book called Specially Designed Instruction, Increasing Success for Students with Disabilities. And this book is a wonderful tool. I would highly recommend you checking into this book. And she talks about a guiding question that we should use as we evaluate that SDI piece for a student. And she says that if a student only needs accommodations, they do not become eligible for special education services, but are served instead by general education teachers. So this is, yes, it is linked in the Padlet. You've already checked it out. Oh, Matt wrote that. I thought Bobby wrote that. So this definition or this question is kind of what we use to guide the rest of our presentation. We're really looking at if the student is successful with accommodations with general education peers, then the SDI probably doesn't need to happen, because that's as we'll get into later, SDI is really that part that makes special education special education. So just looking at SDI in context, and since you're kind of new, Bobby, I will spend as much time as you need. So ask questions on some of these terms, because I'm not sure how familiar you are with them. So I don't want to talk about something if you are unclear about what it is. So please ask for clarification. So as we look at SDI in context, we kind of look at it as like a bullseye almost. So the outer three rings are really services that are universal to everyone in the school. So we have Universal Design for Learning, which is a framework for learning that gives students a little more choice and autonomy in their learning, in how they are taking in the information to be taught and how they're representing what they've learned. So that's the universal piece for everybody that everybody should be looking at, each teacher's looking at. And like the word says, it is universal. So it's just for everybody. It's a very proactive way of teaching, because you don't have to have specific data on students, which is where it differs a bit from the inside rung, the next one of differentiated instruction. So differentiated instruction is another universal way, another framework that is more reactive, in that you have to know your students before you can really start to differentiate. You need that data on their skills, and maybe where are they in math compared to where they are in English if you're in elementary. And Bobby, maybe if you could just drop us, what grade levels are you working with also? 6 through 12. Okay, yeah. So really just figuring out where students are, and then it's more differentiated instruction is more of the teacher structuring some of those different opportunities for students to learn and express what they're learning in different ways. So then within that, we have multi-tiered system of support. Again, that's another framework. It's a universal framework for the whole school. It looks at every aspect of the school, community, stakeholders, everyone to help make the best decisions for what's going on. So then within that, we have that specially designed instruction piece. And it is different because it's a legal obligation that we have to students. When students need specially designed instruction, it is telling us, the educator, that the student needs something special in order to have access to the general education curriculum. So that's why we wanted to talk about this. Matt or Alana, if I missed anything, please feel free to jump in on that. Okay, so let's take a look at what SDI involves. It's going to look at really adapting content, methodology, or instruction. And so we're going to break down each of these three. First, we're going to look at adapting the content. So really adapting content is adapting what students are learning. We know students with disabilities are expected to master the same standards as classmates without disabilities. So this is important to keep in mind as we think about adapting the content. Those students with disabilities are required to master that content. And so we have to be careful about how we adapt it. The important thing is that standards can often be met by learning different content. So we can think about how we present that, which we'll get to here in just a few minutes. So maybe a student needs an alternate text, maybe a lexile change, something like that. Anne Benninghoff has this great quote, and I have it in front of me, regarding adapting content, because it just really resonates deeply with me. She says, "Years of low expectation have resulted in terrible outcomes for students with disabilities. Most students with disabilities will not need adapted content in order to be successful. Instead, they need changes to how they are being taught rather than what they are being taught." So there will be times when students need adapted curriculum or content, but we really need to assess that how piece. How are they taught? And then how can they show us that they have learned what we're expecting them to learn? And we'll get into that here in a little bit. So some examples of adapting content that we had were just some reading programs. This is not, we don't work for these companies, we don't get royalties or anything like that. It's just that these are some research-backed programs that will help to adapt the content. So things like Wilson Reading, OG, Read 180, Touch Math, Spring Math is another one that really adapts the content for students. I think, did we have other examples that anyone wanted to throw out for examples of adapting content? Or Bobby, do you have a question about adapting content?
Yeah, I put it in the chat. I just asked if she had if she was familiar with any of these yet, or she might not be. Yes, she's going through OG training.
Oh, that's
Awesome.
I think OG is probably the best out there. So that is amazing that you're getting trained in that. Okay, so let's look at methodology and how adapting methodology looks. So this is really about adapting how students are being taught. So this is, from the teacher perspective, what strategies are you using, what interventions, and what techniques? So we know that specific methodologies are more likely than others to be more effective and efficient for students with disabilities. And so when we looked at those circles, we looked at universal design for learning and we looked at differentiated instruction, and the methodologies involved with each of those can fit into adapting methodology. So remember, each of those is a framework, and so it's multifaceted. It's not just affecting one area, it really affects all areas of classroom life. So when we look at adapting methodology, we can go on to the next slide. We can talk about like the integrated practice, that macro SDI, so on a bigger level, the direct explicit instruction, modeling, chaining, task analysis. So it might be something where a student needs intensive phonemic awareness instruction or like multisensory methods for comprehending new vocabulary. So these are little things that can be done that are considered SDI, but also fit within some of the frameworks of UDL and differentiated instruction. So as we really think about the methods that teachers are using, you know, are we giving information verbally? Are we putting it up on a board so that students can see it? Are we making videos so that students have access to those videos after the lesson to come back to? Just really taking all of those things into consideration. So adapting methodology is probably one of the most common of the three. And as you plan for your methodology, this is really where you want to ask yourself, what am I doing today that is special? If it's something that all students are getting, then that's going to be more of an accommodation. So what are you doing specifically for the student who needs the SDI that is special? So then we have delivery of instruction. So this is adapting when and where students are taught. So within the instructional context, general education room, classroom, or separate setting, one thing that's very important to remember is that all students are general education students first. And so really they need that access in that general education classroom with their non-disabled peers. And then maybe the pull-out support in a separate classroom is going to be more of that SDI piece and what's being done within that time frame. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. The benefit of keeping students in a general education classroom is that they're with their non-disabled peers. They're getting access to that quality gen ed content that is being taught by the teacher who really is that content specialist. So we can look at group size also, whole class, large, small, individual, independent. So as we look at ways that we want to adapt the delivery of instruction within maybe a small group setting or an individual setting, we really need to consider the individual student. Sometimes we get into this mindset that a small group is going to solve everything. Let's just write in a small group. Let's add this as an accommodation. Let's put it in SDI as a way to adapt instruction or delivery of instruction. We really need to ask ourselves, what is being done to make that special? Because if it's the same curriculum, then it's not SDI, or if it's being taught the same way. So those are some things that we can take into consideration. Maybe a student needs more time, maybe a pre-teach or a reteach. So these are wonderful options that a teacher can use even for 10 minutes before a class to maybe pre-teach some vocabulary, or to even give it to the student the day before. We know that building confidence in students is so important. So maybe taking that time to pre-teach material to the students and maybe a few vocabulary words, say, you know, tomorrow we're going to come in, we're going to talk about this, you're going to have this knowledge. I really want you to be prepared to tell us about something about the Battle of Gettysburg. So we can pre-teach those materials and we're getting that SDI in, but we're also building student confidence, which is really something that we want to look to try to do. Okay, so some examples, instructional techniques or strategies. So a lot of the acronym-based learning, Marilyn Friend has probably 12 to 15 different acronyms for how to remember steps for different problems. Because I'm looking at Matt, the one that always jumps out at me is PEMDAS when talking about math, right? Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. Oh, that's what Bobby was thinking too. So we have all of these different learning strategies that we can use with our students. We can use multi-sensory instruction. Some of those more packaged programs also provide opportunities for that multi-sensory instruction, VCATs, also VACT, not VCAT, sorry. And then increased instructional intensity. So again, more practice. So that would be the reteaching, more steps. That might be pre-teaching, and really just more review with the students. And everything needs to be done with intentionality. And it's not just on a whim. SDI must be planned for. All right, so Matt, I think you're up.
I'll even unmute myself, see how that goes. Probably be better. So we're going to try something here. I know we just have Bobby, we get to do this kind of on your own, so we'll see how it goes. But we have a couple of examples, just a few phrases. I think that Alana's going to put them into the chat for us. And based on what we've talked about so far, take a look at what it says there, explicit instruction on how to use graphic organizers. Is that something that we look at? Well, we look at those two things, actually. The explicit instruction on how to use graphic organizers and the graphic organizer itself. Now, one of those is specially designed instruction, and the other is support and services. So that's something to consider as you look at those things. So when you involve instruction, and we have to think about that, which is SDI and which is a support. Again, I kind of just gave it away, I think. So
Bobby, do you want to put it in the chat? Or just, you can do it in the chat.
Yeah, support is, and I think that's an excellent point. SDI is, and like Katie just mentioned, it's an explicit plan. You know, it's instructional, and we'll get into some more detail about some questions you can ask yourself, like how to help you define what those pieces are. We're going to try another one, or do we want to move on to our next slide, I suppose. Do one more.
Okay. Manipulate.
I'm asking Alana to type a lot, so you know it's pretty heavy lifting over there. I know.
I'm coming.
I know.
Sorry,
right.
I have to go. I have to switch screens.
That's all right. That's all right.
I'm going to give you two options.
Okay, let's take a look at these. Test your. It's always interesting when it's one thing to type on your own and have someone else waiting on you to type something. Is whole new level of stress there. Manipulatives. All right.
What do you think about that one first? And I'm going to go copy and paste another one from my other.
We think that one is SDI or is a support and service. It's manipulatives. Yeah, I think you're right. Manipulatives are something could be typically an accommodation. And it's something that's available not just to students with IEPs. And we get into explicit instruction, verbal summarization. Yeah, I think the giveaway is the word instruction, I think, as we start looking at those. And we could go on and on. We've got a nice long list of these things, but the bottom line is the two things you mentioned so far. You know, explicit instruction is a part of specially designed instruction. It kind of goes hand in hand. That's in the title, so it kind of makes sense. And accommodations are sometimes directed by an IEP, but like Katie mentioned, with things like universal design for learning and differentiated instruction, multi-tier systems of support, sometimes accommodations are available to anyone who just needs them or wants them, really. So the difference is here, an IEP has directed us to apply an accommodation in this case, or to perform specially designed instruction. So that's the main key difference between these things. So, oh, bonus. Recorded books with appropriate pacing. That's a nice one. Use that one a lot. I've been around long enough where I had to record my own books on the tape when I started off doing that, and that's a support, as there's not an instructional component to it. It's part of it. It's part of the accommodation and support there. So let's take a look at, and we've seen some of these terms already, and just talking about what is not specially designed instruction and the core. I think sometimes we tend to make this to overcomplicate, like a lot of things. I'm guilty of that. Like the first time I went through that activity myself, I kind of overthought what SDI was, and just coming back to that instruction, like differentiation, universal design for learning, those kind of things are like, especially universal design is a school-based approach. It's a framework that our school buys into, and we provide our kind of, like Katie mentioned, a proactive method to accommodate groups of students. The difference is that, in our classrooms, when we get down to like accommodations, that there's some students who require in their IEP that they have options to listen to text. And where universal design for learning comes in is we make that option available to more than just students with IEPs. So it's something that our classroom can take advantage of, and not just students with an IEP that has it as part of their accommodations that are required. So SDI is, not our homework help, and content support, accommodations, and even modifications those are all supports or services students receive. And like I mentioned already, those don't necessarily have to be tied to an IEP. You can get them through a service plan, or sorry, with a 504 plan is what I was thinking in my head. I don't know why I said service plan there, but or just, I was just talking to a parent this morning, actually talking about students, there's a student with color blindness, and thinking about the accommodations. You don't necessarily need a special education label for this teacher to support that need. If that's made clear to the parent, clear to the teacher and staff there, we can start thinking about how we're going to accommodate the student with that kind of physical need. So those are some things, it doesn't take an IEP to get those things, but for specially designed instruction, that's required first, because that's, like Katie mentioned, I think that's the special part of special education, is that instruction that students receive that's different. That's an addition, that's supplementary to what they're receiving as a general education student. So areas that specially designed construction can address, and there's a long list of them here. I'm not going to read through them all, but when we're going to talk about present levels here shortly, but this is one of those things that when we talk about IEPs in general, we're going to make sure we've at least thought through these different domains to address student needs. We don't want to miss something. Now, not everything is not every need is going to be met by specially designed instruction. That's for the case conference committee to determine. Some things accommodations can address, like physical needs could be an accommodation that could be taken care of, like glasses are an accommodation that we don't need an IEP for. But you do want to consider those things and not overlook anything as you're looking through, just getting that baseline information for students. So that's an important thing to go through. So you want to think, because there can be, and sometimes like behavior is occasionally overlooked as somewhere where we need explicit instruction. We don't just learn better behavior by being around kids that are better behaved. We still have to be taught how to improve those. If we determine that's a learning barrier already, we need to be taught how to address that behavior need as we're going through. So that's kind of a little talk about, what SDI is not, and some of the domains that SDI addresses. And then we're going to get into some guiding questions here. I think that will help us, because this is something that we kind of went through when I first read through this piece. it really was helpful to me to especially some of those more complicated situations where there's a lot going on, to help us kind of define what special design instruction is and is not, because we need kind of something to help us sort things sometimes. But it comes down to this, as we look through these questions, is it special? I have had that situation where students, not that and we'll talk about who can provide it, who can provide special design instruction, but it's not just what everyone else is already getting. Special design instruction is something different, something additional, and it doesn't have to be hours and hours of direct instruction. It can be a few minutes here and there. So that's something Katie mentioned also. So that's one thing that I think sometimes we get caught up in, that if we have a 50-minute period, then we must have to spend 50 minutes of special design instruction. And that's not necessarily the case. It might be, but we have to think about the student need. What do they really need from us in order to make progress, to close that gap whenever possible? So it should be tied to their unique needs. So that's something present level should make really clear what the student's unique needs are. I want to make sure that the special design instruction addresses those things. And it should be then tied to a goal, because this is something that I try to make clear when we talk about this, that when you're looking at a student, present levels is kind of your base. That's our starting point. The goals that we describe for the student are where we like to end up. Special design instruction is the bridge between those two things. So this is the things we plan to do over the course of a year that are going to help the student get to the point we describe in that goal. So we want to make sure it's instructional, not just a tool or accommodation. Like I like Alana, I appreciate the example you used, because there's direct and explicit instruction around how to use a graphic organizer, but just giving someone a graphic organizer, those are two different things. And a graphic organizer by itself is an accommodation. But if you need explicit instruction on how to use it, maybe even how to develop your own, that's special design instruction. That's instruction that most students are not going to receive without an IEP first. So it does have to be intentional. It's not like an accidental thing that happens. Well, I don't know that there's anything in education that's actually accidental. I think that most everything we do is intentional. It might have incidental results sometimes, but we're always trying to improve and trying to address things. But we want to design things to bring about progress. And some of that we're going to talk about, thinking about evidence-based practices as well. So there's evidence, there's research supporting what we're doing. Now, we talked about those packaged programs. The nice thing about packaged programs like Wharton Gillingham or others is they've done the research and can show you that this does work for the students and gives you the results that you're looking for. There's other means to get that same kind of information. We'll talk about that a little bit. I think that Alana's going to talk about implementation a little bit later on and kind of hit those things. And I do like these last two things. Is this something that is transferable or generalizable? That's a hard word for me for some reason. So if I can do it, if the student can perform something in a small group, is this something they can use in a larger situation or in a different location, or something they need, or we can reduce our support so we can, as we build the skill, we might provide some scaffolding to support that student's needs, but then we start pulling those things away to hopefully make them independent in those pieces, so that we're not just, we can't spend the time all the time, every time with the students. So we have to give them the skills to be generalists and independent, because that's, again, one of the key pieces. Sometimes it's overlooked with special education, is that the point is for students to be in the population with everybody else and to be as independent as possible. So anything we can do to get along that line is beneficial. So we're going to take a look at a couple scenarios, but I want to make sure, Bobby, you have any questions or points, concerns, things you liked or want to hear again? Be happy to, and also Katie and Alana, Sean, if anything you want to add to what we've thrown in there so far, I appreciate that as well. Hardest thing I do all day is be quiet, so. Okay. Oh yeah. Hey, yesterday we had this training in person. And we went down a deep rabbit hole on accommodations and modifications. So it's just one of those things that can be a challenge for sure. And I appreciate you sharing that as we're going through this. And I'm going to take a little bit of time. We're going to look at a couple scenarios, just so at least the first one here. And I guess we'll just do this one because this one kind of is a snapshot of what I've seen when I do classroom observations in the past. You know, we have a student with an IEP, the teacher's in there a few times a week. And when they're in the classroom, they're repeating the verbal instructions, they're modeling the routine, and there's praise, there's circulation, check-ins with the student. And the issue in this case is the instruction's not really clear. You know, what is it, you know, this, and I guess the thing that is, you know, I see happen a lot of times is, well, this is a special education teacher providing this. Does it require a special education teacher to do this? You know, to do what's in this on this page? Because this isn't really a good example of specially designed instruction. I could have an assistant that's in that support role and providing these things to make sure, remind the student, check in, make sure they're on task, those kind of things. Sometimes that's, you know, that's kind of maybe keeping some progress data for us, but the instructional part isn't right there. We're reminding the student, we're not teaching them the skills they need. How do we help them maintain contact? How do we help them maintain their attention or continue or initiate a task or stay in their seat? You know, this one doesn't really go to that instructional piece, as opposed to the next example, and it's kind of a dead giveaway on the second example because it's a lot longer. But I did like this one. It's the same situation, same student. In this case, they're going through teaching. At the end, you can see toward the end that while the student's working with their peers, the student's doing something a little bit different. As they go through the sequence, the teacher's working with the student on how the sequence is supposed to work, and then later on checking to see if the student actually follows that sequence. So I think that there's instructional content built into this one, so it's a little more evident that there's specially designed instruction going on here. So the thing I also like about this is the teacher's not spending the whole class period doing this. You know, it's a quick, we're going in, I'm doing this activity with the student, maybe every day, maybe every other day or something like that. And it's also something that as a special ed teacher, when I'm in the room, I can keep track of. But as a general education teacher, I could also keep track of this. Is a student following the sequence that we plan? Do I see evidence of those things? Can they show me what's the first step, second step, third step? So I can have them do that for me. And when you do those kind of things, it kind of gets a similar vocabulary between your general education and special education teachers, so you can, you know, continue the instruction even if there's not a special ed teacher in the room. You know, that's one of the things that I learned a lot about when I used to share an office with some occupational therapists, and they had the I Hate to Write plan. They were teaching handwriting, and they realized that with their 30 minutes twice a week, they could not have the impact the classroom teacher is at when the students are writing every day. So they had a lot of, they'd work with teachers a lot so that they could reinforce the writing they're getting in their occupational therapy sessions all the time. And that's kind of what we're talking about in some extent here. The specially designed instruction kind of gets the ball rolling. The general education teacher can reinforce that work going forward as well. So that just occurred to me as I was talking through it. So I was just making sure, just thinking about that as we're going into this piece. And that kind of gets to this next piece about who can provide specially designed instruction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Before I dive into that, I want to make sure, Bob, if you have any questions, Bob, or if you have any examples or something that you've encountered that you wanted to share, or any ideas along that round. And Alana and Katie, if there's anything you want to add, please do. I always appreciate that. Okay. That's as long as I can stay quiet, so I'm gonna have to move on. Oh, boy. Absolutely, that's great. You know, using a different, change in the methodology is fantastic. And especially in math, you know, looking at whatever way or ways this are being taught in the gen ed curriculum, you can adapt that to the student based on, well, I know they're going to learn it better this way, or like we mentioned touch math before and some other things like that. There are different methods of learning the same kinds of content, which is fantastic. Yeah, associative memory, right? Memory is always a fun and tricky thing to address for sure. And I think what that it also does you credit knowing, you know, because in order to do these things, you have to know what's going on in the other session too. You have to be aware of what your students are experiencing. And in order for me to change the method, I have to know what method the classroom teacher is using. You know, I can't just arbitrarily choose something. I could, I guess. But we have to be aware of what's going on in that classroom so we can reinforce and be supplemental to that. We don't have to do it in place of, we can add to what's going on. So this is really one of the big questions. Yeah, right. Win-win. You know, who can provide specially designed instruction? And I think, whoops, skipping a couple slides there. And, you know, one of our common themes in almost all the trainings that we provide is the idea of shared responsibility, that doing this in isolation is right. It is a team sport. You know, special education in isolation is really non-existent. You know, that where I started teaching, that's kind of the way things were. Special ed was self-contained environments. Kids were shipped off to different schools to receive services, and that's really doesn't happen anymore. And so the mindset sometimes have to be shifted a bit more still, but it is a team sport. It's a shared responsibility that ties into the school culture and expectations of your building, of course. But, you know, if I'm going to be, if we want the best bang for our buck with working with our students, then we all have to be on board. And and we have to share our students. I know that, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, yours, mine, and ours, and there's no such thing as your student. They are all our students, whether they're gen ed or special ed, ELL, or gifted. So we have to think about that as we're going through this and plan for it. So, and I'm a firm believer that the more people we involve in this, the richer experience students are going to have. Because as special ed teacher, I'm going to have a little different perspective on how things can work for a student. As a general education teacher, I have a different perspective. Again, if we can get the more people, the better. I mean, that's going to have diminishing returns after a while if we have 200 people in a room. But I think, you know, the three of us working together produced a better product here than if one of us had just done it by ourselves. So I think that's a big plus to having different perspectives on service. But shared responsibility of special education teacher and general education teacher. And in special circumstances are paraprofessionals. And Alana explained this yesterday a bit, and I think she did a great job just talking about this being a supervised situation. I was thinking of, you know, and you guys would probably have better experience on this, but when a lot of times in the co-teaching environment, when we do stations, when we have a paraprofessional might be administering a station, I'm going to train them on what to do, and I'm going to be in the room when they do it, and I'll check in on them as we're doing things, because I certainly don't want to miss an opportunity with the student. So it's that level of oversight, and paraprofessionals do some wonderful things for us and are great liaisons and for our students, but they're not teachers, and we can't expect them to take on those roles. Not only are they not necessarily prepared, they're not paid to do that. You know, so it's important that we respect what they are able to do and what they're not supposed to do. So paraprofessionals play special roles, but they're only going to provide specially designed instruction in unique circumstances. So they're always going to have someone as a tether, I guess, when we're doing those kind of things. So hopefully that's clear, because that's something we work in districts. Some districts kind of I don't know. I don't want to say anything bad about anybody, but sometimes they kind of go a little too far on, yeah, they stretch it. Exactly. That's a great word. I like that. They stretch it a little bit, and that's going to happen sometimes, but in the main, we really have to be careful about who's instructing our students, because ultimately, as a teacher of record, you are responsible for that special design instruction that's going on. So there's got to be a heavy dose of quality control, especially. So we have to think about, this a lot of times special education is really a shared responsibility. And you have to think, especially as a new teacher, who are your people? When I have a problem, when I have a question, when I'm stuck, when I'm inside the box and want to get out there, who do I go to for those out of box thinking situations like this isn't working for the student, or I'm not sure how to get there? Because that's a key thing to this whole endeavor, is we have to kind of understand what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and we better know who's going to get it done. So, we have to, those kind of things all have to come together. And if we're missing a part or struggling with a part of it, it's nice to have a team around you that can help with those pieces. And they may not be comfortable at first doing some of this work, but being aware of that you're there to help and train if necessary can be a big assistance to that as well. So sometimes I know this is something a lot of commented on this particular slide about SDI teams. And I don't know that there's going to ever be a team that's just specialized in this, but it definitely, when we think about student needs, the folks around you are part of that team, whether they kind of know it or not. And who you rely on to get some of those answers can be really important. So I'm doing the planning part. Yeah, planning for SDI still. Okay, we're still going on. So now we kind of know a little bit about what it is and what it isn't, and who can provide specially designed instruction. Now, as we're planning for this, because that's one of the things, it ties hand in hand with progress monitoring and goal development, those kind of things. All this stuff, special education, doesn't happen without a plan. So planning for specially designed instruction is important. And it all begins with our present levels. I'm not going to read through you the definitions that we have here on this page and the next. There's a federal and a state level definition of what present levels are. But that's the beginning point for really in the meat of the whole IEP. This is what we build the plan on for this student. So we have to be really careful. We want to have good information, good data to start from, so we have a good indication of where we're going with that student and where we'd like to end up. The better we are with the present levels, the more clear the rest of the IEP is going to become. Yeah, if you have, wow, your first month and you're jumping right in revising IEPs, that's fun, I guess. Now, but yeah, I think that's one of the pieces when I get to review IEPs, when you read through present levels and it's a struggle, I can usually predict that the IEP is going to struggle later on. And one of the big pieces, as you're thinking about IEPs in general, is internal consistency as a concept. That as we develop the IEP, the components need to be aligned, need to make sense together, so they're telling the same story and describing the same concepts for the students. So that's one of the big pieces, and it starts with present levels. So the big ideas with this piece is the SDI is tied to goals. It's instruction that's tailored just for that student. Yeah, that's right. And that's the way that our IEP system was built. So, because it makes sense, it's connected. You start at point A and get to point Z by going through all the letters in between. There's not really any shortcuts there. A lot of folks want to try to find those, but there aren't any really. It takes work to get through that. But the ultimate idea here is that we understand our students' characteristics and what they need, so we can tailor what they need to them. And not to say we have to teach every student individually, but as we're working in groups of students, we understand what each person needs. So we might deliver it a little differently to one student as opposed to another. We might expect something different for one student as opposed to another, even if the instruction is the same, because like Katie mentioned, instruction is probably the last thing we want to change. and it's the least common thing to change anyway. The methodology is what shifts a lot of times. So thinking about that, how we can adjust the method that students learn or are taught, even when we have a large group. So, and we talk about implementation. This is real similar to concepts that are ascribed to co-teaching a lot of times, and it comes down to collaboration in these three areas: collaboration and development of the specially designed, development of the specially designed instruction, its implementation, and evaluation of its effectiveness. So those three things are tied together. And I'm going to go through these next couple slides because what this is really comparing here is the role of the special educator versus the role of the general educator in these situations. So as far as collaborative development, the IEP process and documentation is heavy on the special education side, while MTSS is heavy on the general education side. But there are places where they cross and meet. So it's important that we have, while the load is going to be lifted by the different groups in the majority, we still have to work together to come up where are we going to cross paths here, so we're consistent in that as we're developing the work. Right. I think that's fantastic, because I think more than having that collaboration as you're developing the IEP is key. I've seen some research around goal development, for example, as a special education teacher in isolation versus in collaboration, and just the difference. First of all, the difference in the goals it's kind of crazy to see, and how much more specific and measurable they become when we get into including the right people. And so as we're looking at planning, the big idea here is just to remember that it's a process, that we're not just and it's always changing as we're planning. We want to be clear on what we're trying to do, what the target is, what the goal is for the student. We want to think about those difficult moments as we're working together. And I set a goal working with a gen ed teacher or a classroom teacher of any kind. What's going to get in the way for the student? How are we going to address that? Kind of trying to anticipate things. We want to make sure, I like with Benninghoff's book where she goes through the metacognition process, just kind of that, it's another word for task analysis really, but how do you approach a task? Sorry, let's try that again. Thinking about how you approach a task and what you tell yourself as you walk through it. And how am I going to express that to students? Because a lot of times our students don't have that skill. So how do we teach them? Here are the steps. Here's what I'm thinking when I'm going through this, kind of that think out loud moment when you're trying to instruct or model the skill. Adapting that general approach where possible. And I guess in my mind, when I think about access skills, we want to make sure the student has the skills necessary to access the content in that classroom. That's a big piece of a statement on our present levels really, is we're going to think about how the student's disability affects their access and progress in the curriculum. So if they're missing skills that are required for them to access that content, then we have to think about how are they going to attain those things, or are there ways that we can accommodate them so they can get to that content without those access skills. So we have, those are things we have to consider as we're devising that specially designed instruction. As far as collaborative implementation, this one's pretty obvious with the gen ed.
Oh, Matt, she had a question. She had a quick question in the chat. Sorry.
Would that be like missing foundational skills to get to a higher level? I think you have to, if the student's missing those foundational skills, well, let me put it this way. Here's one of the situations I bring up a lot. And, we think about math, computational skills. I know you guys, I shared this example yesterday, so you can say next if you heard it before. But one of the things that comes up often as students get older is when we have conversations around when it's appropriate to use a calculator, for example. So that foundational skill of the computation, the student's been working on it for several years and they've not made much progress, while the rest of their class has advanced to different levels of mathematics. So we have to think about, as we pull kids away to instruct them in those foundational skills, and I'm not going to say there's a right or wrong in this, but you have to consider that as you're developing the plan for a student. Is it worth the time, or can I accommodate that need and move on so they can access those higher order concepts? So you have to really, I can't tell you to ignore the computational skills, just give them a calculator. You have to decide as a case conference what's needed for the student. What do we need to do to make sure they're accessing the content because they're able? Yeah, you have to, I think that's a great way to put it. It's a risk assessment. You have to think about, what does the student need? What's a life skill we can teach them with the calculators? They can move on and get into those higher order math skills that they might miss if we pull them out just to work on the computation. So that's kind of the thing with the foundational skills, that you have to make the call as a case conference committee. What do you want to do here? And how are we gonna make this work for this student? Because they still need to make progress with their peers when at all possible. So that's something, and be involved in that classroom as much as they can. So one of the pieces that when we talk about designing the instruction, we want to think about the students and consider the students' specific needs as we're looking at this. So think about their disability, their age, the setting, subject area, and the specific skills necessary. So consider those things as you're working through design of the special design instruction here. So the first piece is, what data do we have for the students? So what information do we have around their skill set and their current level of development? So if we don't have information, it's going to be much harder to design the appropriate plan for the student. I think that's going to be, if we don't have enough, if we don't know what their reading skills are, we're going to have a hard time designing a reading plan for them. If we don't know where their behavior skills are, we're going to have some difficulty designing a behavior intervention plan for that kind of piece. So we have to have those ideas in place. And as we get into implementing our plans, evaluation has got to be built in as well. For an IEP, we have to do progress monitoring. So we're going to progress monitor goals just like we should. General education teachers, during their implementation, they're going to be doing some formative assessment to keep track of their interventions. How well is intervention working, especially with our different tiered approaches to instruction. We'll have some integrated progress monitoring that we can rely on. One of the pieces that is often overlooked is that kind of minding the gap, so to speak, when in special education, want to keep an eye on the performance of our students with IEPs, and as well as the performance of their classmates, so we can see, are we closing the gap? Because that's something that we brought up yesterday, and that we celebrate the gains our students are making in that special ed classroom, but we also have to keep in mind what their peers are doing that are without disabilities. So if they're making gains and our students are making some but not closing the gap, I mean, that's a great thing that they're making the gain. But we are, I guess, challenged to see if there's ways we can even improve that. So are there ways that we can close the gap further so our students can get closer and closer to that grade level expectation? So and being able to share with parents what the plan is. How are we going to do that? What's the idea here? And before I hand it off to Alana, any questions or concerns? Sean, you just turn your camera on and have a question or comment, or just wanted to be seen on camera. That's all right too.
I snuck off to make some coffee, Matt. Just be honest with you.
That's right. But
no, Bobby. I mean, on top of the resources they provide here, I know if you get on their website, you probably already have, but they have tons of modules that you can do at your own pace. Our team, it's called the Office of Student Support and Accessibility. We have some resources too that I'll put in the chat to share. If there's at any point, so special ed teachers are in short supply, even more so than gen ed teachers. So, good for you of making that transition into the field. But if there's any point that you need anything, as you're kind of learning the ropes here, I know the the people on this call and then us here at the department, the team that I'm on as well. We have lots of resources and are happy to help you with any questions that you have.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Sean. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
So I'm going to go ahead and turn things back to. All right.
I think I'm next. And also we
you are.
usually typically give a book away at our trainings. And I think since Bobby is here and doing all this work, we need to send her a book. So Bobby, if you, at the end of this, after you do an evaluation for us, if you send, let's see, maybe Katie or Matt, since they're in the Indy office, your just send them an email with and say I'm Bobby from the the training, and then your mailing address or your school address, and we can send it to you. Because that would be, I just think that's only fair. All right. So we're going to talk about implementation of SDI. Go to the next slide. Matt is the slide person today. So SDI as a processes. So see, these are some of the things that you could do to deliver SDI. You have direct explicit instruction, self-regulated strategy development, modeling, live and virtual, maintenance and generalization, and we're going to talk about that. So for SDI, for modeling, you can videotape yourself talking about the metacognition of how you are teaching something to somebody else. You do that with your students, you model something for your students. You could also videotape it for later, but those are the processes of how you can deliver that SDI within those domains. So we're going to kind of go into a little bit of those in the next 10 slides. So have you heard of gradual release? Maybe yes or no, you can put that in the chat if not, but the I do, we do, you do. So I do is the modeling, examples and demonstration, okay? And then the we do is when the students are working with you after you model something, you want to make sure that they know what you are doing together. So you kind of ask them questions. You go through the model, but you let them have some input. And then after that, it's the you do. So the students get to do that on their own. So this is direct explicit instruction. It's research-based. The I do is really important to do it yourself. So you're teaching the student a new skill without them interrupting you, right? So you're going to go through the whole process without them interrupting you. Then you're going to ask them some questions, maybe do the model again with them, and then you're going to see what they know on their own. So that's just direct explicit instruction and how you teach new skills. And then you're going to review it and do it again. So it's called the gradual release model, and it works really well with students. And that's from Fred and Barron. Self-regulated strategy development. So you're teaching. So SDI, remember, is what this teacher is doing, right? The teacher's doing what this is teacher behavior. So you can discuss the strategy, then you're going to model the strategies for the student, and then you're going to help them memorize the strategies and then support the strategies like gradual release model. So, and then you're going to transfer it to them, and then they're going to be able to perform it together. So you're going to teach something to the students, and then they're going to make it their own, right? But at first you kind of develop the background knowledge and go through these steps. And at the end, you're going to let them be able to own that. So I think Matt gave the example of organizers. You're going to teach them how to use a graphic organizer. You're not just going to give them an organizer, right? So if you just give them an organizer, that's not SDI. But if you're going to explain and you're going to show them and you're going to model them how to use the strategy of an organizer, or have them make their own organizer up, you're going to model it, they're going to memorize it, you're going to support it, and then they're going to transfer it. So they're able to use those organizers on their own. So that's just one example. There's a lot of examples. But when the teacher is giving the SDI, it's important to note that it's the teacher behavior, not just giving the student something. Thank you. Makes sense. I love your chat too, Bobby. So you're great. Thanks for that. I like feedback. I appreciate that. Next slide. All right, so live modeling, again, scripted. I kind of talked about this without interruption. I always like when I modeled for students, I always wrote down the steps of how I'm going to teach it, because I needed to practice it before I taught it. So first I do this, then I do this, then I do that, because sometimes as learners, it's natural for us, right? But we really, in order to teach something, we have to write that down, or what does it look like, and then practice it and then teach it to other students. And that's just how I felt it was very effective. And it's also research based. When you model it, you don't want their interrupting you, asking questions. You really want them to see your think out loud as you're talking. And then they can ask some questions after that. But it's really important when you model to make sure that you are going through the processes, going through the steps, letting students see your learning so that they could take that learning to them. And that's just really important when you model. You provide immediate feedback, just like you're giving me feedback. I love it. If you don't know something, you're putting it in the chat. If you agree with something that we're saying, you're putting in the chat, and we appreciate that. And then you summarize what the students have learned, make sure that they have opportunities to respond, and that you have opportunities to give them the direction that they need in order to know if they learned what you think that they learned. So you're going to do that. So that's all about live modeling. And then virtual modeling is the same exact thing, but you can videotape yourself doing that. Some students really need to see it more than once. They need to see it later. You model some math lesson, you model a math problem, and you think that they know it. And then they go home with their homework and they forgot what happened. So you need to, maybe you can write down your model for them. You could use pictures. This goes first, then next, then that. It's useful for independent activities or review. So if the students are doing something on their own, but they really still need your help, if you write that down, that model down the steps, they could kind of look at that while they're working, so that they could have that support that they need and they can transfer it themselves. Or I used to videotape myself modeling like math problems or something, thinking out loud. It helped me as a teacher to make sure I was explaining it correctly. And also my students who were absent, they could watch it later, or you didn't have to, or at home, or they watched it again, especially my kids that needed, they had a hard time with remembering the steps. So it was nice for them to see me do it again. I did like a Screencastify. It's a Google extension, Chrome. I think it's free. And so I would do that. So virtual modeling is really important, and it's a really great SDI if some students that need it, they need that breakdown, that task analysis and review. And then maintenance, just does your student retain the curriculum once it's been presented? I don't know if you have, I mean, you said you just started, but sometimes students have short-term memory. So they remember it this week, but then you test them again next week, or you're like, we learned that 2 weeks ago. And they forget, right? Yeah. So you have to make sure that when you think that they have it, that you think they have that goal, review it, go back and make sure that they really still have that, because a lot of times it's building blocks. Just to make sure that you are progress monitoring and for the maintenance part of that. Like prepare a schedule, it says check for maintenance, just making sure again that they remembered those skills. Remember, we did that last week. Let's go back over that. And you can keep maintenance data to make sure that they're maintaining that goal. So if you said that they reached that goal, just make sure those checks that they still know they've still reached that goal of mastery that you set for them. So that's just the maintenance piece in that. And then generalization, it needs to be across settings. So if students sometimes when they can do something in your resource classroom and it's maybe a little bit harder in the general education setting, so you have to just think about those kinds of things. Students should be able to use a skill when there's different people giving those skills. So if it's the gen ed teacher, the special education teacher, you really generalize across settings with different people. They can varying the way students can respond when learning a new concept or a skill. So are they able to write it? Are they able to orally state it? Whichever you would like them to do. Adjust the rewards and reinforcers used. So you can kind of scaffold those rewards and reinforcers as you needed and gather data. So just making sure that the students are able to do the skill no matter who's there, who's in the class, if there's somewhere else, if they're in the gen ed setting. That's really important just to think about how that's set up. So just an idea. So there's a great website and the resource. We're giving you lots of resources today, but there is this right here. Yeah, you like it. So it's in the Padlet. You can go look that up. They have interventions and strategies for students, and it helps with SDI planning also. So if you have there's tons it talks about the fidelity of the strategies and the interventions, what kinds of students it helps with. You might not have tons of time, but it sounds like you're really wanting to learn all these things. This is a great place to get some intervention ideas. Has, grades 6 through 12. Definitely you can kind of go from math or behavior or English arts. They talk about chaining and backward chaining and cover, copy, and compare, just like different strategies that you could use with students depending on their disability, like the unique characteristics of their disability. So it is great. Oh, thanks. And Matt says it's linked in the Padlet. So it is a great, some of the teachers yesterday said that they use that. So what else did they say, Matt? I can't remember, that they also like to use. Maybe if you remember some other websites, so you could put it in the chat.
Yeah, they did mention Intervention Central.
That's
There's
right.
one place to go, and I'm trying to think if there's, I mean, there are other places, obviously. You can hit, but those are the two that came up yesterday.
I think the biggest part of this is that they are research-based, and SDI has to be research-based. So it kind of does some of that work for you. The teachers are giving the SDI, and the SDI has to be research-based. So we're just trying to give you some resources that you can look up at your leisure with that. All right, and I think we have one more quick case study that we're going to do. We're gonna go into, which one do you think we should go into? We're going to talk about determining the steps of when planning SDI and discuss the options for SDI, the content methodology and our design, and how would you monitor progress. So when we did this live, we kind of did this at a table, and we talked about, and I think Matt said this yesterday, but there's not one right answer. So there's not, you can kind of think about what goals you would do for a student and what SDI would be appropriate for that student. So we can, I'm going to let Bobby use a chat, and maybe we can talk about these through. You might be reading it right now as we're talking, but I can read it really quick. I think we have about 10 minutes left, and then this could be like our closing activity. Jose is a new student in 5th grade. It is April, and this is the 3rd school Jose has been in this year. Jose adapts well to change, has a positive attitude towards school, and appears to have made friends at his new school. Jose does well in math and enjoys science and social studies. In the area of reading, Jose is able to easily decode unfamiliar words and reads with good expression. However, in the area of comprehension, Jose has difficulty answering questions that require reasoning and total understanding of the story. Jose also has difficulty identifying the main components of a story. Jose's teacher, Miss Lundy, states that although he enjoys reading and does not seem to be frustrated, he will not ask for help when needed. Thus, his reading grade is beginning to suffer. Miss Lundy has the following instructional goals for Jose. Given a reading passage in his instructional level, Jose will answer inferential and evaluate comprehension questions. Given a reading passage on his instructional level, Jose will recall the main story elements. So I guess what we can do is we can talk about what goal do you think would be first of these two goals, Bobby? What do you think that would be most important for him? And I think that there's that question about, or that slide that it's kind of hard to do this virtually. We usually have a slide that has like, is it what SDI do we need? Oh, there we go. Okay. Let me read should focus on recall the main story elements, explicit before inferred. It can be tied to explicit questions to evaluate reading comprehension if needed. Great, thank you. And then we're going to talk about what kind of specially designed instruction would you give to the student? What do you think that you would work on? It says that he can read well, or I'm sorry, he could decode words. So I'm not sure if you have had any students that can decode or they can read, but what is the main problem? What would we focus on? I'm reading your chat again, sorry. Okay, so what would you teach? What would you use for the specially designed instruction for that student? just so focus on recall of main story elements. All right. So I think yesterday, yeah, anything, and again, this is not right or wrong. I mean, a lot of people had different things about this, but if it's comprehension and not decoding, then you talked about the main idea of it. So the specially designed instruction, how do they learn? So what is special or unique for the student? What do you think that we could do to help him with his reading comprehension? And I can't remember, do you have any thoughts on that, Bobby? I know I'm making her on the sentence. Oh, I can't. I couldn't, sorry. You can unmute and talk. I can't see it all. Okay. Great. Okay, so decoding, there are fluency interventions that can be done as well if it shows behind. Great. And reading fluency. I'm sorry, I couldn't see it. So I appreciate that. Yeah, so you can do the reading fluency interventions around those things. So the specially designed instruction, making sure yes, if he's struggling with fluency, he may lose the knowledge before.
And that's a similar concept that we had yesterday too, just that if we're missing the comprehension pieces, even though we can decode words, are we actually fluent readers? Those are two different concepts really, because that's a big point to catch. That's all right. But sometimes the chat here gets a little bit
I was trying to go back and forth. I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't
like
do
going on.
it. Yeah.
Okay, right.
I think you're right on though, Bobby. And exactly what Matt said too. Yeah, we talked about, is he really a fluent reader if he's not comprehending what he's reading? So that was great. So we would just kind of like to go through these scenarios because these would be like maybe a present level. However, if this was your present level, it doesn't have any data in it, so it's not a good present level, like you just said. Like it needs to have data in the present level. So yeah, so looking at that SDI, looking at what's important. Dibbles would be helpful with that. Great. So yeah, with the present levels, yes, getting some data around what that looks like, what that means, how much comprehension does he have, actual numbers, right? We like to see numbers in the present levels. We need to see where the baseline is, where they need to go, and things like that. It's great that he has a positive attitude towards school, and it says he's not getting frustrated, but you know, he might be if he's not answering any of the questions correctly. I mean, there's a lot of things that are missing from this present level, but you hit that right on the head with all of those things that you were saying. So you're doing great on this. And we have some of these scenarios and the teachers are able to talk through these scenarios, but it's really more important to go back to your IEPs and kind of look at what your specially designed instruction looks like in your goal, right? With your goals. So if you have any questions after you do that from your actual IEPs, I know this is just kind of practice, you can come to us and ask us for anything like that. So that's just another idea. I think. Yeah, and we are pretty much done. And I really like this quote. We can just end out with this if anybody else wants to say anything, but SDI is a balance between the standards to which all students are held and the unique learning needs of the students with disabilities. It is at the very heart of what makes special education unique and must be carefully planned, implemented with fidelity, and assessed to determine its impact on student outcomes. So it really is what makes special education special. If you say anything to anybody, if you talk to after this training, that's really what our takeaway is. It's what we are doing special for that student to meet his needs and to reach those goals. And those are our resources. Yes. Thanks, Matt, for being the page person. If you wouldn't mind, Bobby, to do an evaluation, we know, I know there's just one of you, but we do like feedback and we appreciate that. If you can go to the one on the left, you can scan it, or Matt put it in the chat to give us an evaluation for today, that would be great. And if you want to come to any of our other trainings, that would be on the right. And also make sure you send us your mailing address because we're gonna send you a resource. Matt or Katie, do you have anything else to say? Just appreciate you being here.
Yep, I will. There's our contact information, Bobby. So I'm Katie. So if you just send me your mailing address, then I can get that book out to you. I've got a few other resources I need to mail. I hope to be in the office tomorrow.
Yep. And please remember, if you have any questions, you can. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just gonna say, hey, thanks for showing up with us today. It was nice to talk with you. And hopefully we helped out a little bit.